So in this video, we will look at how we work on the question number 4. It is related to the tropical storm and a hurricane. So before I read the case, and I want to do a little bit explanation between the relationship between hurricane and tropical storm. So after a couple of the hurricane hit the Texas and Florida and Georgia, you should have some idea about the relationship between the tropical storm and the hurricane. So always it is starting from the tropical storm. So as the tropical storm keep moving forward the inland, move to the land, it may adding more power by go through the ocean. So if the wind get to certain speed, and it will become as a hurricane. So it always starting from the tropical storm and then may turn to a hurricane. So after you understand the relationship between the hurricane and the tropical storm, and we can start to look at this case. So in 2012, Tropical Storm Isaac formed in the Caribbean and was headed for the Gulf of Mexico. So there was an initial probability of the 69% that Isaac would become a hurricane by the time it reached the Gulf of Mexico. And so after reading this first paragraph, you already see one number, which is 0.09. So that is the probability for event. So what is the event? So the event is the hurricane. So which means the probability for a hurricane. So we use H to indicate this is for hurricane. It is a 0.69. So 0.69. So now we look at the first question. So what was the probability that Isaac would not become a hurricane but remain a tropical storm when it reached the Gulf of Mexico? So now we are actually is asking for what's the probability it will still be a tropical storm. So after I explain the relationship between hurricane and the tropical storm, you will know. So this storm can either be tropical storm or tend to be hurricane. So a hurricane and a tropical storm will be a complement event. So in the class we learn if the two events are complement event, so the probability will satisfy this equation. So the probability of the tropical storm will equal to the probability of 1 minus the probability of a hurricane. The reason we have this equation because the tropical storm and hurricane, they are complement event. So then you will end up 0.31. So the answer for the question number A will be 31%. So that's great. And also we learned the tropical storm and hurricane, they are complement event. So which will satisfy one of the requirements for the using the Bayesian theory, that is the event A has to have the sub-event. So H and the T will be the two sub-events, A1 and A2. So now we look at question number B. So 2 days later, so the National Hurricane Center projected the path of Isaac would pass directly over Cuba before reaching the Gulf of Mexico. And hurricanes that reach the Gulf of Mexico have the 0.08 probability of having passed over Cuba. And the tropical storm that reach the Gulf of Mexico have a 20% chance of having passed over Cuba. And the question here is, how did the passing over Cuba alter the probability that Isaac would become the hurricane by the time it reached the Gulf of Mexico? And so we see two more probability in this question, 0.8 and 0.20. So this probability is for two different events. So the first one is hurricane that reach the Gulf of Mexico have a 0.08 probability of having passed over Cuba. So this means given we know it is a hurricane, and the chance to pass over Cuba will be 0.08. So in other words, if we try to use the notation we learned in the class, so that will be probability of given it is a hurricane and the chance it will pass Cuba. So we use C to indicate to represent the Cuba, and it would be equal to 0.08. So this is the first number we see here, 0.08 means. And the second, tropical storm that reach the Gulf of Mexico have a 20% chance pass over Cuba. So which means given it is a tropical storm, the chance for the tropical storm pass to Cuba will equal to 0.20. So now we actually from now, at this point, we actually have totally four probabilities. So the probability for hurricane, the probability for tropical storm, the probability for given it's a hurricane, the chance of passing Cuba, and the probability for Cuba given it is a tropical storm. So we have the four probabilities. So now we look at the question. So how did pass over Cuba alter the probability that Isaac would become a hurricane by the time it reached the Gulf of Mexico? So in this case, what we're really looking for, if you read the question carefully, is given it is some storm gonna pass in Cuba, so what's the chance it's gonna convert to the hurricane? So that is what we're looking for. So now, before we know the new information, it's gonna pass in Cuba for sure. We already know the probability for hurricane is 69%. So after we know this storm is gonna definitely pass Cuba, so this new information will allow us to changing the probability of having a hurricane. So this is the indicator to indicate you should be using the Bayesian theory. And the second reason you are considering using the Bayesian theory is because look at the relationship between these two probability. So you are flipping the condition. So that's the second indicator indicate you should consider use the Bayesian theory. So now we're gonna look at how we write down all the Bayesian theory for this specific case. So our Bayesian theory. So we're looking for the probability of H given C. So the Bayesian theory tells us it will equal to the probability of H times the probability of conditional probability. You flip your condition given H, and you are looking for the probability of C. And for the denominator, you repeat your numerator H times the probability of C given H, and plus your complement event of H, which is the probability of T, and times the probability of C given T. So C given T. So we know the probability of H, which is 69%, and probability C given H, which is 0.08. And we also know the probability T is 0.31, and probability C given T is 0.20. So we plug in all the numbers, we will have 0.69 times 0.08 divided by 0.69 times 0.08 plus 0.31 times 0.2. So now if you're using your calculator, and you should get the probability given it is given it's gonna pass the Cuba, what's the chance gonna be a hurricane? So 0.69 times 0.08 and divide by 0.69 times 0.08 plus 0.31 times 0.2 . And then we end up 0.0899. So 0.0899. So that is how to figure out the probability given it passing the Cuba. So what's the chance it will become a hurricane? So what's the chance will become a hurricane? So the final answer here will be 0.4710. 0.710. So you have 71.10% chance to have a hurricane given it is passing Cuba.